There's an interesting excerpt from 2 Corinthians chapter 12 that I'm going to read tonight on day 299. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 6 through 10, Paul writes these words, and specifically in verses 7 and 8, I want you to catch this. So I'll start in verse 6. It says, even if I should choose to boast, I would not be a fool, because I would be speaking the truth. But I refrain, so no one will think more of me than is warranted by what I say or do, or because of these surpassingly great revelations. Therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. So pause. Verses 7 and 8 that I said to keep a keen eye out for is Paul saying that he was given a thorn in his flesh. And then in verse 8 he says 3 times he pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. Continue. In verse 9 it says, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, and persecutions, and difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. And I've read those last couple verses before, but I got an interesting new a new take here, because I've unpacked these verses more. I'm more so familiar with verses 9 and 10 there, where these are very popular verses in the New Testament about, this is why for Christ's sake I delight in weaknesses, because through my weakness and my persecutions and my difficulties then I'm made strong. And we hear all of that. But again, it's verse 7 and 8 that I find particularly interesting, but a lot less quoted. It says that Paul, he writes that he was given a thorn in his flesh that was a messenger from Satan to torment him. And he pleaded 3 separate times to the Lord. So multiple times he's pleaded to the Lord, like, please take this away from me. But the Lord said back to him, my grace is sufficient for you, because my power is made perfect in your weakness. So specifically, I was curious reading this, like, what was the thorn in Paul's flesh? Because I have my own, some people call them demons, I don't know what you call them, but I've got my own past issues, or kind of, I don't know if qualms is the right word, or just difficulties, propensities towards sin, I guess. Vices is, I think, a word that I've used for that often. And it sounds like Paul had his own. Now, in my application study Bible, it talks a little bit more about this thorn in the flesh. So check this out. It says, we don't know what Paul's thorn in the flesh was, because he doesn't tell us. Some have suggested that it was malaria or epilepsy or a disease in the eyes. It says reference Galatians chapter 4 for a little more context there, by the way. But either way, my application study Bible says, whatever the case, it was a chronic and debilitating problem which at times kept him from working. This thorn was a hindrance to his ministry, and he prayed for its removal, but God refused. Paul was a very self-sufficient person, so this thorn must have been difficult for him. And I relate this and kind of chalk it up to more of like temptations or propensity of sin in my life. And I think there are some biblical scholars that even are open to the idea of, or maybe it's more of a temptation or like a sin issue, because Paul talks about a lot of that in Romans as well. But it also might have been a physical issue. Either way, he was dealing with a thorn in his flesh, something that was just bugging him and bothering him and trying to drag him down. And either way, like in our life, we will experience trials, whether they be physical or whether they be mental, emotional, temptation, whatever. We're going to experience times where there feels like there's a thorn in our flesh. And we're going to pray to God to remove those things. I've prayed to remove certain things in my life, and sometimes it's not in my timing, but it's in God's. And I just need to hold on to the fact that if there's something that's lingering in my life that's making me scared or making me struggle, I need to remind myself that God's power is made perfect in my weakness. It's not an excuse to continue to sin, but it's just that correct perspective that he is greater than I. And albeit I'm trying to be like Christ, even though we're trying to be like Christ, we are not God. I'm certainly not God. So it says that, Paul says he's going to delight in his own weaknesses. In his own hardships, he's going to delight. In his own difficulties, Paul is going to delight. Because when he is weak, he is strong because he relies on the Lord. Lastly, in my application study Bible there, related to verse 8, it says, 3 times Paul prayed for healing and did not receive it. He received, however, things far greater because he received greater grace from God, a stronger character, humility, and ability to empathize with others. I feel that, by the way. I feel like my empathy for others grows when I am looking internally and realizing my own things that I've struggled with year after year after year. According to God's sovereign plan, doesn't heal some believers of their physical ailments. We don't know why some are spared and some aren't. God chooses according to his divine purposes. Our task is to pray, to believe, and to trust. Paul is living proof that holy living and courageous faith do not ensure instant physical healing. When we pray for healing, we must trust our bodies to God's care. We must recognize that nothing separates us from his love, which that talks about that specifically. Nothing separates us, neither heights nor depths. There's a really great excerpt that I read before. It's in Romans 8, verses 35 through 39. But again, nothing separates us from the love of God. And our spiritual condition is always more important than our physical condition. So let's live in that. Let's believe that in this season of life. But again, talking about these verses, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 6 through 10, we've always talked about the last verse there, that for Christ's sake that we should delight in our weakness and in our hardships, because when we're weak, we are strong. But let's not forget that Paul was what was he setting up there? Like, what's the context? Is he was actively battling thorns in his flesh. We might not know what that is specifically for Paul, but in kind of a divine way, it might be better that he doesn't specifically list the exact hardship that Paul himself was dealing with, because if he had listed just one specific item, it might be harder for the average reader to relate to. But it's open-ended, and I almost wonder if it's written that way where he doesn't divulge exactly what's going on, because we all deal with different things. And Paul's not specifying, but I think that's divine. I think we all deal with different things, and whatever we're dealing with, one's not harder than the other. They're all hard to us. It's all difficult to us, even though we deal with different thorns in our own flesh. So whatever thorn that you're dealing with, whether it's temptation, whether it's a physical ailment, let's do our best. And it's hard, I get it, but let's do our best to trust God, because his grace is truly sufficient for us. As it says there, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Day 299.